I was spiritually very strong, but emotionally, I was worse than a 10-year-old. When I think about my 10-year-old daughter and her emotional maturity and my emotional maturity at 30, she's more emotionally mature at 10 than I was at 30.
That is the voice of my new friend, Josh Roberie. I invited him to come onto the show to talk about his new book, Believe Again, Finding Faith After Losing Religion. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the Nook Podcast. My name is Steven, and it is so good to have you listening today. If you've ever got any questions or comments about this podcast, you can always drop me a line directly. My email address is steven@nookpodcast.com. That's Steven with a V at nookpodcast.com. And now you might also be thinking, wait a minute, I thought we were just doing pastor appreciation stuff this month. Well, we still are. Josh was a youth pastor for many years and really hit a wall of burnout. So much so that he actually quit his job in ministry. After so many years as a high-capacity volunteer and then taking a staff position, he realized that he was working at a pace that simply was not healthy or sustainable.
Our youth group was really radical. We did Thursday night prayer meetings with a Thursday night youth service. And then we did a Saturday night prayer meeting with a Saturday night leader service. We did Sunday morning church. In the afternoon, we did kind of like next steps leadership classes on Sunday afternoons. And then every now and then there'd be a Sunday night meeting, revival meeting. Sometimes we would do midnight prayer. So we'd start at like 9 o'clock at night and pray until midnight on Friday nights. And then I went to a leadership Bible study on Tuesday nights. And then I led kind of like a leadership Bible study on Monday nights. And then I had an outreach small group that met on another night. Of course, we had the youth services and church services on Wednesday night. I don't know if you're getting the feel for what I'm trying to put out here. There was something every single night I was doing. You know, we loved it, but it did feel busy and missed out on a lot in college. Didn't have a normal college experience because I was doing church stuff. And I started to wonder if this is the only way to do things. And I started to be exposed to some different things because eventually I did become the youth pastor of my church. For 2 years, I was a youth and young adult pastor. And as I began to see how things were going in other churches, I started to wonder if there was another way to do this where I wasn't so exhausted all the time. And now my identity was wrapped up in this place, in this position that I was in. And I was wanting success and to achieve great things so much that I was not aware of the parts of myself I was sacrificing. I found myself saying things to people that I didn't even really believe, but I felt like I had to hold this line. I didn't even really believe in all of it. It just felt like I had to. And so I was losing friends. And then the friends that did have, I didn't feel like they really knew me. They just knew who I wanted them to think I was in a sense. And I was like, man, I got to make a change. And so I thought what I would do is that learn a different culture so I could try to figure out more who I used to be and bring that guy back. And I thought I'd make a transition and go work at a church for a couple of years and go plant a church. But instead, as I started that journey, I realized once I got on the other side of my church job that I needed to take some time off and really figure out what I wanted to be and what I believed about myself, God, and others. And in the process of that, I started having these crazy experiences and started writing them down, started turning it into a blog after a couple of years. I started writing them down, but I didn't post them. And then one day, it was actually my birthday. It was January 23rd of 2014. I posted my first blog. And the response I got from posting that was overwhelming. And the amount of people who said, what in the world's going on? That's just like what I've experienced in church, and wanted to reach out to me, encouraged me to write another one. And so I wrote another blog. And again, people began reaching out like crazy that wanted to meet with me saying, I have the exact same experience you had. Can't believe it. And I thought if I could get to 52 posts, I would have enough for a book one day. So I just kept writing. And the more I wrote, the more I wrote about how awful my life was, how much of a mess it was, how bad things are going for me, the more people told me how encouraging my posts were. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, no one had ever really told me that my preaching was encouraging before. They would say, "Ooh, that was a good word," or "That was a great revelation," or "That was funny." But, now they're like, "Man, what you're saying is so encouraging." And then I would sit down with people and they'd say they'd want to meet with me. And I would meet with them thinking that they would want my advice in their situation, but nobody did. They just wanted someone who could relate, who knew what they were going through, that would listen, and they would just tell their story.
So was it mostly, you say there were so many people that started reaching out to you. Were they folks that had been in ministry or just people that had been in church in general?
Well, people in ministry definitely reached out to me. At the time I was 30 years old. And so I didn't have a lot of friends at the time that had started in ministry and were no longer in ministry. Although there were some. Most of them were people who were leaders at a high level at a church that got burnt out, and we're just looking for what's next. And some of them were staff members. So some of them would be like people who had done YWAM or served in a youth group or people in those situations. And then people in ministry reached out too.
Gotcha. Something I just read on your blog that really was one of those things of, wow, yep, that's exactly what I had realized in my last couple of years working at a church, is you talked about living in that bubble. And that's exactly what I used to call it, in realizing that this was my work life, this was my social life, this was my small group, is that everybody I seemed to come in contact with at any level had something to do with church. And it just started to feel so isolating that I just rarely interacted with somebody who was outside of that bubble. And that just started to gnaw at me. Is that similar to what you felt like you had been through?
Well, that was definitely the thing. The crazy thing was, that was kind of, when I look back, it was one of the benefits was that I had everything I needed for relationships and friendships. And we had an insider language we shared. We were all about the same mission. We were all about the same things. And it caused us to have really deep relationship in a lot of ways, that we were so close that I don't think I could have had that bond with people outside of it. I think it's what kept me going for so long, was like I never wanted to be disconnected from those people. But at the same time, there was another side of it where I was not my real self, and that was really an awful feeling at the end of the day, knowing that I could not be who I really wanted to be for these people, and not knowing if they would really like who that Josh was.
Yeah.
And then when I got outside of the bubble, I didn't realize how bad it was, to be honest with you. So when I got out of it, I realized and this is going to sound hard to believe, but I honestly did not know how to talk to someone my own age. I did not know how to talk to outsiders hardly at all, because the only way I knew how to relate to them as lost people in need of salvation. And so the depths of my conversation with people always revolved around that. I had no idea how to have a small conversation with people. And because I was the youth pastor and for about 2 years there, and the youth and young adult pastor, and even before that, I was on staff. So it was kind of like being on staff would be seen as like a honored position. Everyone laughed at my jokes. Everyone wanted to do what I wanted to do. If I wanted to go eat somewhere, that's where everyone wanted to go. And then I remember having dinner with a family after I left my job in the church. They actually attend the church and still do. And I remember talking to them, and I would tell jokes, and like the husband and wife would not laugh. And I'm like, man, these guys have no humor.
Tough crowd.
And then when I got, tough crowd. And then I remember there's just these long, weird pauses where it's like, I didn't have anything to say, and I didn't know how to listen for sure. I had no idea how to listen to people. I thought that my job was to have the answer for everyone. Now I know that my job is to have questions for people and help them draw out the answer from their experiences and what God's telling them. But at the time, it's like my job is to give the answer and to tell them what God's saying. But then when I got my first job, I would start to tell jokes and nobody would laugh. I was actually quite obnoxious, and I never knew it. And they were only laughing because they were uncomfortable. They didn't want me to turn my attention to them and embarrass them. And I was quite a jerk, to be honest with you. And I had no idea. I was just had no idea how to relate to people outside of my church circle. And that was a huge problem, huge problem.
And isn't it amazing how you can feel so stunted when all of a sudden you're aware of that? Just realizing of, my goodness, what planet have I been living on?
Yes. If you would have talked to me during those years, before I turned 30 and I was working in youth ministry, I would have thought that I was one of the best communicators around. How do you communicate to people and convey a message? I would think that I was great. And then when I got outside that circle, I realized that not only was I not a great communicator, but I was very stunted in my ability to express what I was feeling to people and communicate to them that I understood what they said, because I only knew how to communicate through a preaching tone to people. I was such a student of the Bible and prayer and, reading books on spiritual things. I was spiritually very strong, but emotionally, I was worse than a 10-year-old. When I think about my 10-year-old daughter and her emotional maturity and my emotional maturity at 30, she's more emotionally mature at 10 than I was at 30. I had no idea how to manage my emotions, manage my expressions, my tone, deal with setbacks, deal with people who see things differently than me. And I definitely felt that stuntedness that you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, and you just mentioned your daughter. I'm curious, before you left that job and started really having this big aha moment, what price was your family paying in those days when you were starting to come to terms with, wow, there's got to be a change involved here?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think my wife would mind me telling you our marriage was very rough at that point because I had no grace for her whatsoever. Had this such high expectation for myself that I couldn't fail, and so I couldn't be vulnerable in the way that I needed and humble towards her. And I also had this super high expectation for her and what she needed to be and do to meet my standards. And so I viewed all of her actions or inactions through a lens of how it made me look or how it made me feel, instead of what's going on with her. How can I serve her? And we were out of the house. So we served together, and she was just as crazy as I was, if not a tad bit more zealous. And so we never ate at home. We ate out almost every night. We were probably spending we did the budget, so I know what the numbers are. We were spending $500 to $600 a month eating out. Ooh. So we hardly ever, we used to joke around that the best thing Amy made was reservations because we never cooked. So, and then the crazy thing is when we left our ministry job, Amy stayed home for 2 years, about a year and a half at least of that, if not 2 years. She stayed home for the first time ever, and she started cooking home meals, and we started eating as a family around the table. And that was something we did not have before. And not only that, but we found out that Amy is the best cook in the world. There is no one's food I'd rather eat. People invite us over, and my friends that might listen to this, I'm sorry, but I'm just it's not going to be as good as if Amy was cooking it. She is so good at cooking, and we were missing out on that. But something else we were missing out on, and I write about this in a book in a chapter called Backing into Worship, it's because I was at church every single night of the week. There was no time for us to, there was no point where we unwound together as a couple. And so there was a Wednesday night church service that I wanted to go to when I first started going to a new church. And the anxiety I felt over the possibility of not going to that church service was so high that it was akin to a panic or a breakdown, because I was thinking about the possibility of maybe not going to a Wednesday night church service for the first time since I was, 14 years old. I was 30 at 31 at the time. And it was so hard for me to say, I'm not going to go. I texted a friend. I said, hey, I'm thinking about not going to church tonight. What do you think about that? And my friend texts me back, who had known me since I was a teenager, and says, Josh, you have made enough church services for the rest of your life. There's not enough church services you could skip to get into the negative. You can stay home on Wednesday night. And Amy and I went for a walk in the neighborhood. And when I tell you that, I felt the presence of God on that walk with her. The wind, it was blowing through. It was springtime. The azaleas were blooming in Baton Rouge. And I was pushing my daughter in the stroller, and I'm just like, we've done this maybe a couple times in our marriage. What's wrong with us? We don't walk through our neighborhood. Now we do it almost every single day. But we didn't do that, and we're missing out. But when you ask the price that my family is paying when it comes to my daughter, that's actually a huge part of why we made the decision. I was rocking her to sleep each night thinking, I'm not going to raise her like this. I'm not willing for my daughter to pay the price. I don't want her to grow up like this. And I thought, if I think that way about my daughter, what does my Heavenly Father think about me putting myself through this?
Yeah.
So I just thought, if I don't want to raise her in this, then what would God say about me being in this? And I said, I'm not raising my daughter here. She's not going to grow up with fear, condemnation, shame, feeling like she's inadequate. We're going to find another way to do this where she's not raised in that environment. And so Sophie doesn't know this, but even at 1 year old, she was inspiring me to find a better version of myself so that I could provide a better home for her. And when I talk about growing up like this, I mean growing up in my home.
Sure.
I don't want her to grow up like this in the environment that I was having in my heart and creating in my home. So yeah, she was a big part of why. And I'm very thankful because she has never experienced that. My 5-year-old knows nothing of that lifestyle. They have their parents all the time. And I'm extremely, extremely grateful for the fact that my kids are growing up in a home where they're loved, celebrated, and their parents are not putting ministry before them.
Well, and you with that, you've kind of answered my follow-up question there in that, what do you feel like you're reaping in the now? There's got to be more than just that. I'm just imagining that your time with Amy has got to be that much more rich when you're just not constantly pulled on and feeling like there's one more calendar thing you got to take care of.
Yeah, the stress that she was carrying was affecting us in every way, and me as well. And it was definitely causing us to not enjoy each other as we should. And, I wasn't enjoying hobbies and not unwinding just in general, because I felt like it was unspiritual. I felt it was unspiritual to sit at home on a Saturday with my family. And I felt that it was laziness if I did that. And now there's Saturdays and Sunday afternoons where we don't go anywhere and we sit at the house together. And I don't really want to be anywhere else than with my family. It is my favorite place to be in the world. And it took us a while to transition into that because I felt so guilty. I felt this condemnation that I wasn't, what else could I be doing today? What else could I be preparing for? What message could I be writing? And I got all that out of my system, and now we just enjoy each other. And, about a year or two ago, my kids, we had this pond in front of our neighborhood, and it's got some hills that kind of grassy hills that kind of go into the pond. And it was fall, and we were out there, and my kids were running through the leaves, my 2 daughters. And I just had this euphoric moment of just taking in all that God had done in my life in this one moment where I was at total peace with myself. And I was watching my kids run through these leaves, and I was able to be present with them because I didn't need to be at church somewhere doing something. And I was just so extremely thankful because their confidence, what I'm seeing in them because their parents are present, is massive. So what happens is because we're there and we're present, they don't have a need that's being created inside of them to have outside validation, which I'm hoping pays off as they go into their teenage years, where they're not being influenced by other people, but instead are influencing them. And we hear it from every teacher, every school year, how compassionate my kids are and how much they are helpers of other people. And I'm hoping that us being present for them fills their cup to overflowing so that they can be givers to other people. Because that's what I'm seeing in them right now. And I hope it continues, fingers crossed. We don't have it all figured out. The proof will be when they have kids, if we did anything right or wrong. So there's truly, we don't know, but I'm hoping that we're doing some good things right now.
Well, isn't that quite a payoff for you? Just for that kind of feedback to realize that you've modeled this for your kids, that ministry is in those one-to-one moments, those taking care of people, caring for people, infinitely more than punching a clock or attending one more church thing. I just believe that that's what Jesus wanted for us, to be in community with people and to be vulnerable with people and get tight that way, as opposed to just always, concerned about what is the next item in the bulletin or anywhere else for that matter.
Yeah, I think another thing that is a payoff is how much they love the local church. I mean, they love church. They love what we do for ARC. They love coming with us to church plants. They love going to church plant kids ministry and telling us about the experience that they have. They recently went on to a church plant with another family, and they've just done it so many times that Amy and another family had traveled, that my oldest Sophie was like giving them tips and advice on, what to expect and how this is going to go down. You know how kids do, I guess, just
Sure.
to show who's smarter, I guess. But no, they love the church, and they love serving. So we do Serve Day. A couple years ago, Sophie got sick on Serve Day and couldn't come, and was crying the whole day. So it's not that we have not made church a priority. I think we've just put it in its proper place.
Yes.
And because of that, my kids love church. They love God. They love serving people. They love prayer. They don't love the Bible yet, like I want them to, but they don't understand the value, I think, yet of that. But they definitely love God and prayer and church. So.
Well, right, but even as what they lack in wisdom of actual reading scripture, they're seeing it happen. So by the time that their reading cognitive catches up, it's going to be. I would like to think that it'd be second nature. It's like, oh, well, this is what we've been doing. This is what I've been seeing.
Yeah, I love the Bible so much. It just changed my life. I started reading the book of Proverbs, every day, starting about 15, and I really think that's a huge part of why I've had any amount of success in my life, because the scripture has helped form my thinking and view of the world. So I had this passion to teach my kids the Bible, and I'm totally okay with everything I'm about to say, but my oldest, we found out. And this is the first time I'm really saying this publicly, that she has dyslexia. And so for the longest time, like, I had this passion to teach her the Bible. I mean, it was not clicking. But in my old mindset, I would just double down and force it, And I'm like, hey, listen, I'm not forcing anything. If I can cause her to fall in love with me, she will love what I love, which is the Lord and the value that I have in the Bible. So I just go right back down to focusing on just where she's at and not trying to force something on her. And because of that, we're seeing her love for God in other ways manifest. And, even with her salvation is a real interesting story, because, I wanted her to give her heart to Christ at a young age. And I was hoping I'd be able to show her that she was a sinner in need of Christ, that she could identify her sin and repent before God, because I was such an evangelist. I knew all the things that people needed to do, the Romans road and this and that. And, but she just wasn't giving that to me, and I would ask her, hey, in church, have they asked anyone to pray to accept Jesus? Like, what's going on? Like, you're not really able to articulate this like I would hope. And then one day she told me that she had prayed, and I was like, did you really? I think she just wanted me to leave her alone. And I just watched her, and, the real literal steps of, praying that prayer, I never had that moment with her where she, defined what sin was in a sense. We definitely talked about it, but in that hardcore sense that I used to have, it didn't happen. And I was getting really disappointed, because I mean, my spiritual life is so important to me. It's the number one thing I want to pass on to my kids. And then she just amazed us and surprised us because right before she turned 8 years old, she came to us and said, "Hey, I want to be water baptized." And I was like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yep." She's like, she explained the whole thing: go down in the water, come up a new person. My sins stay there, and I'm ready to do it. I want to be a follower of Jesus. And I was just like, okay, it was so clear. She knew exactly what she needed to say. But what she needed for her is that act of baptism, she needed that literal experience because it was too nebulous, everything else. And she needed that baptism experience to signify her salvation. And so, me, I'm a licensed minister. I don't pastor a church, but I get to, I'm a pastor in a sense because I pastor pastors. And I've always wanted to be a pastor and nothing else. The vision I always had was taking my kid to the beach somewhere to baptize her, or doing that myself and walking her through that. And she said, nope, I want to do the regular baptism thing that they do at the church. And I was like, okay. I was like, but you want me to be in the baptism pool with you? I got some friends at Highlands. Maybe I could pull some strings, And she's like, nope, whoever's the person that's doing baptism that day, that's who I want to do my baptism. And I was like, gosh, this is hurting me, And so we get to the baptism day and we're all pumped and excited, and we get her there and she gets in line. I was like, would you like me to wait in line with you? She's like, nope, just go stand in the crowd. Like, what are you doing, dude? And I was like, well, let me pray for you. And she did not want me to pray for her.
Oh,
and I was like, but she let me do it. And I said, just prayed for her, a real quick prayer. And she's like, Dad, please, just go stand in the crowd. And so I went and stood in the crowd, and I was feeling so defeated. And I was tempted to take my phone out and, video or photo it. And I was like, you know what? Let me just watch this.
Yeah.
And I just stood there with no phone, no distraction. And I watched her own that moment of faith and come out of the water smiling. And I was like, this is the best gift this kid could have ever given me. She rejected me putting myself in the center of her salvation experience so that I could watch her own the most important decision she'll ever make in her life. And she looks back at her childhood. Her whole childhood is going to be filled with this overwhelming presence of this like dad that was there for every single second of her life. But when she looks at the moment that she came to Jesus, that she'll be able to say was something she did on her own, not because her dad was there. And I know a lot of people in ministry might have trouble understanding that because, I think we all want to baptize our kids and be the ones that pray with them, since we pray with so many other people. But I truly think that what I experienced was much better because, I'm in part of every part of that kid's life, but this part she'll be able to say was she owned it herself. And I got to be her dad and only her dad in that moment, and not her pastor / dad. And my old self would have forced myself into that situation. I would have just forced my way in,
That's a word. I'm having a tough time even trying to figure out how to respond to that, because that is just an absolutely amazing story, and it just makes me, all the more. I just met you on this call, and it just makes me that much more glad for you that you were able to kind of arrive where you did years ago and realize that a change had to take place. Otherwise, something was going to fall. Something was going to falter on the trajectory that you were on before. So what an amazing moment to just have the way you described it. And I can imagine that your wife must have been just as gobsmacked as you were in that moment.
Yeah, she was helping me. She was ahead of me on what was going on, and that Sophie just wanted me to be her dad, and she didn't need me to be her spiritual leader, which was something I never pictured,
Yeah.
And she was trying to advise me the whole time to just chill out, and it's a good thing. So we have this day that she gave her heart to Jesus, her spiritual birthday. We went out to her favorite Mexican restaurant and got her some balloons. It was a great thing. And I'm leaving out one of the best parts was that she told all of her friends.
Oh,
And so when she got baptized, like all of her friends and their family came to see her baptized. And so we have these amazing pictures of her and her little friends, that she had influenced to be there. And then afterwards, the parents, text us saying, man, our kid is asking us about baptism after experiencing Sophie's baptism, want to know when they can do it, and asking us questions about what it means. And it just really plays in like the whole philosophy of parenting. And this is not a parenting. I know you didn't call me on here to do parenting, but it seems like what we've been talking about. What people don't realize is that when you're unhealthy in your connection to church and God, that translates into your family. And that's the worst thing about this whole thing, is when that affects your family negatively.
yep.
And I think like the way I thought about people, I thought about them as lost people that needed to be saved and saved people that needed to become leaders. I did not understand that each person that comes into my life has value and adds value to my life just because they're a part of it, whether they're saved, whether they're not, whether they're a leader or not. And I need to stop and listen and learn. And if I take that posture, I'll be a greater influencer. And when I did that, what that did was it translated directly into my parenting. Mm-hmm. My kid is not a lost child that's grown up in my house that I need to train to be a Christian leader, so that they can fulfill their purpose as a leader. What they are is a precious gift of God that I'm to love. And if I love them well, they'll love what I love. Of course, outside of affirming, we have to train our children the way they should go. We should discipline them. We should teach them. But the goal is not to form them into a leader. It's to help them become the best version of themselves. And so what I saw with Sophie was a manifestation of how I began to approach people differently. I just wanted to help them wherever they are, take their next step towards Christ, but also just adding value to people along the way. And that philosophy towards my daughter looked like affirming her, trying to find out what her identity is and affirm that identity and giving her the confidence. And as she did that, instead of saying, you need to be a leader, you need to not do what other people are doing, I just affirm her and who she is and what she needs to be the best version of herself. And out of that, she became a leader. She was influencing her friends. She got her friends there, that her friends are talking about Christ. She talks to her friends about Jesus in elementary school, right? Because it's not because she feels like a need to tell people about God because they might go to hell. She tells her friends about God because God's an important part of her life, and she's sharing her life with them. Yeah. And I think that's the way I started living my life differently. And I think that's the way that we're going to change the world.
I could not agree with you more. And it's leading me towards one question that I realized that there's probably never going to be one quick blanket kind of answer for. And obviously you and I are looking at this through the lens of having been inside the church, behind the curtains, and with all the things that go with that. But what do we do? And I say we from a very global place of what can we do to spread that kind of a mentality in the big C church, not this church and that church, but all of us? How can we gear ourselves better to living that out in real time with real people in real places, as opposed to some kind of rote or ceremony or event? Is that's probably a big loaded question, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
This is more important. For a long time, I was quote unquote on top of the world, but in the inside, I was a mess. I was unhappy. I was frustrated, depressed, even, and discouraged. But on the outside, everything looked great. Had a brand new house, brand new car. My wife was awesome. Still is awesome. She's actually more awesome now than even then, if that's even possible.
That's a good way to get points, brother.
Yeah. Hopefully she listens to this. Talking about her cooking, how awesome she is.
Yep.
Had a great, on the outside, everything looked great, but on the inside, I was falling apart. And what happened is when I took this journey, the outside things, everything fell apart. But on the inside, I had never been better. And it's the craziest thing. Like I spent a season cutting grass, delivering pizza. And I was someone that, people paid to travel to hear me speak. I was on a platform looking at people, hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. And I was doing these odd jobs. And it's like, how could you possibly be happier in that situation? Because I was learning the most important lesson I can learn. And that is, who I am in Christ is more important than where I am in life. And if you don't figure that out, you'll never be happy, even if you're at the top. And when we teach people to think that way, they start to live better lives. And I think what we do is we sometimes get the fruit mixed up with the root. And Charles Spurgeon says, our good works are fruits of sanctification, not the causes of it. And if we put the fruit where the root should be, we greatly err. And I think what we were doing a lot of times in the way I used to think about, Christianity, church, and just spiritual life was that I wanted the people to produce the fruit so much that I focused on those things. But really, if we focus on the root of things, which is a love relationship with Jesus Christ, going after him and being a reflection of him to the world, and never at the expense, does our ministry come at the expense of our relationship with God or our family. If we get the root right, we'll always produce the right kind of fruit. The other thing I would say to leaders to make sure that that's happening is that you got to always treat people as if they're the priority. These are God's children that we're dealing with. They're not your people. We use that term all the time. They're not yours. You're a steward of God's people, and you will give them back to him one day. And it's almost like, it's viewed a lot of times when we talk about our people as a good thing, because it's like, hey, I'm taking ownership of my flock. But it's really not your flock. You're going to give that back to God one day. So it's actually not a good thing, because when you take ownership of people in that way, you feel like you can tell them what they need to hear, even if they're not ready to hear it, and you can mistreat them. And because you're thinking about the end result and where you're trying to get them to. And that's just not how the Holy Spirit leads us. God doesn't take control of my life. God lays out for me what I should do, and he gives me the choice to follow him or not.
Right.
And so, I learned that. And then, there was 3 ways I think I needed to believe again. Is I needed to take an honest look at my faith. I needed to reevaluate it. And I don't think we do that enough. I think every now and then we got to be willing to admit, what I believed about that is not right. I'm a humble myself and say it's okay to change and grow as I get new information. And then 2, I think in hard times, we got to realize that God's always doing 2 things in hard times. He's always bringing us closer to him, and he's making us more like him. He's never abandoning us. He's never punishing us. It's always drawing us closer to him. And I think if we do those things, we'll end up serving God in a way that's sustainable, meaningful, and enjoyable. And we need church events. I think there's a lot about our rituals that are actually really good and worth celebrating. It's just not worth promoting over the roots of a love relationship with Jesus.
I so appreciate Josh's honesty and vulnerability in all of this. All too often, I think we as Christ followers forget that leaders in our churches can be dealing with things that are just hard, that they are pulled on from so many different directions, and that we can carelessly expect that they'll just do everything because they work at the church. Having worked on a few church staffs myself, I know full well how we pay a price in all of the involvement, and how marriages and families do too. While Josh did step away from his position as a youth pastor, he is active in the church in a much different way. He works for ARC, the Association of Related Churches, which is a great organization that helps new church planters get set up for success in reaching cities full of people through life-giving churches. I've got a link for Josh's website in the show notes. There you can learn more about his story and buy his new book, Believe Again, Finding Faith After Losing Religion. And while you're in the show notes, you can find a link to the Nook Facebook page. Would love to have you following along there, as well as my social media feeds. If you ever have any questions about this or any other episodes, please drop me a line. My email address is steven@nookpodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening today, and I will catch you here next time in the Nook. The Nook Podcast is a production of Sozo Digital Media.